Mute myself. Excellent. Okay, welcome back, everybody who's watching, to the Victoria Tea Festival Revival. This is 2020. This is 4 o'clock in the morning, Pacific Standard Time. This is the 16th session in a row. Co-host Ryan Moe.
All right, so if you haven't guessed it already, this is going to be the what does Jared have to say, and I'm going to try and keep him on point just because he did have things he wanted to talk about. He wanted to talk about granular gauges, microns, matcha, and the relationship between texture and flavor.
Yeah.
So I've got 43 minutes with him, and I promise I'll let the next guest come on after him. So Jared, actually, you know what? For those of us who don't know Jared as intimately as I do, he's been talking a lot about his show, Jagavision. You can find that on YouTube, and you can see a lot of great content. That's kind of the backbone of what we've been broadcasting here. He's also like the co-host and co-founder of the Tea Festival, but a lot of people know him as the friendly face behind the partnership that is Jagasilk. And it is an equal partnership, and that's predominantly who's on the phone correcting a lot of our things, keeping us on task. And big shout out to, I don't know if we're naming names, but
I think we could say names. We can say names.
Thank you, Mew. Thank you so much for making it work.
Thank you, Mew. Thank you for making me work. No, for allowing me to. Yeah, huge gratitude there for certain. And yeah, whenever we're doing these sessions, it's interesting to wear these different hats. You know, like to be part of the International Tea Appreciation Society is it means so much to me, and I've always it's such a cool opportunity to have an alliance of sorts. It's almost like a canvas or a tool that allows for this gathering of tea purveyors and tea people and a space to kind of share that's a little bit more neutral, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hesitate to talk about my own show, for example, or my own. I often kind of stay back a bit, and I don't really want to talk about what I do so much as like my Jagasilk career when I'm doing this, when I'm wearing this hat. So it's interesting. I appreciate the moments within the Tea Festival where I can be that person. So this is me switching hats from co-director to being a merchant. So I get to talk to you about matcha. So 15 years ago now, man, if you can believe it, 2004, moved over here from Japan with my wife. I'm originally from Canada though, but 5 years in Japan. And when we moved here and we started Jagasilk in 2005, a big part of that was because we couldn't get tea that wasn't old. And I often talk to people that it was like Japanese teas. It's a little bit easier right now, but it was very challenging then to find Japanese teas that you knew when they were harvested, that you had any information whatsoever on them, or that when you smelled them they didn't smell old. And I like to tell people a lot that it's not that Mew and I are like these big tea snobs or something. It'd be like moving to a country where all the bread is stale, like you just, I'm sure that there are amazing bakeries in the country that you've moved to. You just haven't found them yet. But it feels like the norm is that all the bread is stale. So you're not like a bread snob because you want to taste fresh bread or bread that's not stale. It's just something that you were used to and you no longer have access to when you change countries. So it was an interesting exploration to understand why that was. And I think part of it is cultural. I think that the crimson teas or the black teas that we drink as a standard in North America are going to stand the test of time a little bit more than your green teas. The green teas are, especially Japanese greens, especially micro mill teas like a matcha, are going to be so much more prone to oxidation. So there's this definite if we apply the logic that we have for our crimson/black teas, it just doesn't work with the greens, especially, preparation, storage, all of these different things. So as we've been kind of developing the company, we've been peeling back different layers of understanding and knowledge. At first, it was just all about, let's get fresh product. And that remains key, man. To this day, night and day when you have an old matcha versus a fresh, an old Japanese green versus a fresh. We did a little bit of toasting of some Japanese sencha that had gone a little bit with Pedro earlier today from 05. But with our matchas, there you don't really have that opportunity. It's milled to such a fine texture, and another layer of kind of I guess of where did my headset go? There you go. Hold on a second. Another layer of sort of information or knowledge that we've been exploring has been cultivars and understanding, how the role that varieties play in flavor. But we did a talk last tea festival on firing and how, like, finish firing, the how you take an aracha to a sencha. That was a conversation that we talked about last tea festival in 2019. But this festival I really wanted to talk about because in 2018 we got this mill, right? And I guess it was 2017 we talked about finish firing, because in 2018 we talked about the mill, and in 2020 I want to talk about this. This is, I don't know if you can see that okay, but this is this fancy tool, and I don't know if you can you read that? There's like a 25 measurement so there's 0 to 25. Is that
there? That's good. I can see that.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna make ourselves some matcha, and we're gonna measure the micron counts. And the reason we're gonna do this is because one of the things that qualifies a matcha is how fine it is, right? If you take just a standard regular tea and like green tea and you just mill it into a powder, that's not gonna give you matcha, right? Like to get a matcha, you really need to the tea needs to be milled to a minimum of 10 microns, and one micron is 1/1000th of a millimeter. And for a long time, when we were searching for the perfect mill, we were trying to understand what it is that makes a matcha. And the big thing is when you mill this fine, you're likely going to create a lot of friction. Creating a lot of friction is going to create a lot of heat that's going to damage the proteins that are in the tea and burn it. So we spent a lot of time trying to find a mill that we could mill with that wasn't, say, a traditional mill, which is like $10,000 for the stone mill that produces 40 grams an hour and just doesn't make sense for us. And we found this company, Terada, that's been producing tea manufacturing equipment for over 40 years. And they've attached a chiller to this mill. It runs cold water through the teeth of the mill and chills it as it's milling. And then we're able to get our numbers up to 300 grams an hour, which is still very, very slow. But mills it to the texture that we need. And that was really, up until we had this tool, purely sensory. So I want to give you a sense of this. So we were milling a slightly rougher texture when we started, and if you open up that tin that I gave you there, Ryan, it says 3 on the top. I want to go with the lower number, and I want you to put 2 grams of matcha into a matcha bowl. I know you got a matcha bowl there. You might have to run and grab it if you haven't had it set up already.
I just even warmed it.
You are amazing. Yeah, you're on fire. You know what you're doing. You are on your 14th session, right?
Yeah, but my whisk is in the other room, but we're close.
We're 75% of the way there.
Actually, I don't even know where that went.
Water, 65 degrees C. That's what we want. 65 degrees.
Oh, see, I'm at 97. That's good.
There we go. So you can just like kind of toss out half of it, or just like kind of do 50% cold water in there. You'll probably get pretty close to the temperature we're looking for. Okay.
So
I've just put through.
Can I leave you unsupervised for 2 seconds?
Oh. I don't know, man. No promises. No promises.
Okay, I'm gonna do the kettle.
Okay.
With the cold water.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna do the get the whisk.
You're gonna go get that whisk. So some tools that I'm gonna be working with for those who are watching. Got a chasen naoshi. This is actually made by a local fellow. Chasen naoshi literally means chasen fixer. This chasen is made by a certified living treasure named Mr. Kubo. I'm milling. We milled this matcha for the session today. It is it's an okumidori okuda. So another area where we've sort of started peeling back the onion layers is in micro lots of the same cultivar. So we work with a lovely farmer named Mr. Fujioka out of Wadzuka for this particular selection. He produces actually 3 different. Well, he produces the same cultivar, the same variety of the tea plant in 3 different micro lots. And one micro lot he calls Okuda, one he calls Shimoyama, and the other one he calls Fukada. And this particular cultivar variety of tea is called Okumidori, and it grows a little bit slower. When he grows it alongside his yabukita, he's able to harvest the yabukita first, and then just like when we were talking to the Kyoto folks, the Teatopia people in the same region of Wadzuka, this successive harvest is made possible by choosing cultivars that grow at that are ready at different times. So anyways, this is the Okumidori, a little bit slower. Ryan, we're going to throw 90 grams of water onto 2 grams of tea. There we go. Oh, I love this aromatic. Just smells so good. And what's interesting is, again, they were talking how they don't finish fire. And I've just become such a huge fan of matcha that has been fired a little bit. Like, I believe that there's a tempering of that grassy note, brings out so much beautiful nuttiness. But you have to be careful, Ryan, because you are what you drink, right? So we don't want to be too
nuttiness.
You don't want to be too nutty. You know what I'm saying? Okay.
I'm hearing what you're saying.
You're hearing what I'm saying. Okay. Yeah, that smells amazing. And for me, like, when I mill at this texture, I can actually mill to order. Like, there's nothing that's going to stop this machine from moving forward when I mill at this texture. And there's a dial setting that I have on here that's actually like it's at a particular tightness, and when it's at 3, it's producing this texture. And under a microscope, when you have the teeth like this particular unit that are spinning in a circle like the traditional grinders, under a microscope they're actually going to have a circular texture, a spherical texture. This is going to be different from something you put through like a burr mill. Like in a burr mill or a conical mill, you're going to find that the texture under a microscope is square. And so when those square particles, even though they're the same size as the round ones, go through the pores of your tongue, you can actually pick up on the edges, and it's actually going to taste a little bit coarser. But this is round. Both of these are round. And so when you do pick up textures, because it's a little bit too large. So for me, when I drink this, it's not as ideal of a texture. Okay? But it's pretty close. It's pretty close to being pretty darn ideal, but it's just not quite there. So I wanted you to whisk it up. You know the routine. You're going to do the 90 mils over top. You're going to it's whisking is a form of agitation. Okay? And I want you to Hoshino Yuki matcha from Yame. Excellent. Yeah, we're actually Takaki-san, if you were watching him, he's actually from Yame. He was on live to Ani Caffeine, who's watching. Okay. So I'm gonna put 3.5 grams of water into this guy here. I'm gonna take a spoonful of matcha. I'm gonna measure 1.0 grams. Actually, I'm gonna make it nice and thick. I think I'm gonna do 2 grams.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Living that 4 a.m. lifestyle.
Yeah. No, it's gonna be amazing. So what we're doing right now, what I'm doing anyways, and you're not doing,
Yes.
is creating a paste. Okay. And I want to make it nice and thick. I'm going to grab my little kind of, this is a great use for old chasen, is just clip off the tips when they're all beaten up and unusable, and you can use them for whisking chocolate or other powders, etc. But in this case, I'm just going to use it for mixing in a really thick paste of matcha. And what that's going to achieve for me, is too thick of a paste. So there we go. Okay, it needs to at least be somewhat, there we go. You can't really see that, but I'll hold that up to the camera. It's like the texture of koicha. So usucha literally means thin tea. Koicha means thin tea. And one of the things that I really enjoy about our matcha is that, so normally when you're buying tea in Japan, it goes from the farmer to the co-op, like George was talking about, and then it goes from the co-op to the tea company. The tea company will blend multiple micro-regions together, and then you're going to get this, you're going to get a finished product that's given a poetic title. It's roasted, or it's finish fired a little bit, and you guys can't see anything. I have too much on the table here. And you're going to give it this poetic title, and it's going to be amazing, but you're not going to really know who grew it per se. And I love how, say, if you think of the wine industry, it used to be all about like Burgundy, and it used to be all about Bordeaux and Beaujolais in France, right? And then to change that discussion to make it about the vineyard, to make it about the cultivar of grape. Is it Merlot? Is it Pinot Noir? We think that this is just like the most normal thing, but it wasn't always the case. This conversation about a terroir, an origin that's outside of a regulated standard for a region, you know, is a newer thing. And in Japan, domestically, ujicha, yamecha, your teas from Shizuoka, your teas, you know, like this whole conversation is it used to be all about region, and there's a movement now where they're breaking up regions into smaller regions, but there's still, I think, room for it to go down that rabbit hole that wine has gone down, that has encouraged this deeper understanding of cultivars and of farms, and I just find that whole process really interesting. So what we're doing at Jagasilk that's a little bit different is we're buying from farmers before it's sold to co-ops, before it goes to the tea company, gets blended with other micro estates in that particular region, and we're getting single cultivars from single estates, so you can really taste those differences. And again, this is an okuda, which is part of a series that we have this year of different micro lots from the same farmer using the same variety of tea. So what I've done is I've created a really strong solution here, Ryan.
Okay.
I've done like 1 gram of tea for 3.5 grams of water. I doubled it up for some reason. I guess it's because it's 4 a.m. And I did 2 grams of tea for 8 grams of liquid. And what I'm going to do is it's going over this granular gauge. So this is used in science to measure the texture of something. And now, again, 1 micron is 1/1000th of a millimeter. So I was showing this to the camera, but there's this whole idea of the channel that this is going to go through. I'm going to use the stainless steel bar here. I'm going to push on it, and I'm gonna streak this through like that. And this is going to give us a texture. Now, when you look at that texture on the, I don't know if you can see it.
It's grabbing too much light, but they're kind of.
They're kind of. get that closer to the camera, maybe. Maybe I should flip it around.
Tilt it towards yourself more. There, a little bit more. Towards you. Other way. Sorry about that.
Can you see that okay?
Almost like it's flat, and you'll probably be able to see it. There we go.
Yeah, okay. So that is telling me that there's a little bit of granulation up until about 12.5 microns. So I would say that this is probably between 12.5 and 15 microns looking at this granular gauge, okay? So I don't know about you, but when I drink this, right, I get a little bit of texture. And I'm still going to get some even in the stuff that like fits the bill for a texture. And what's really interesting about this machine, this particular mill, is we can actually get it to a place where we're tasting a texture that's actually even finer than what you can get on a stone mill. So we can actually get it to a place. I didn't give you one, but I could mill it even finer than that. It's not really sustainable on this mill. I can't do a lot of it, but I can get it to a 7 on. That's going to change depending on the plates and how far they've kind of had a chance to grind down. And so there is going to be a variation. It's not always that a 7 is a 7 and a 5 is a 5, and it's not this universal thing. Nobody's going to know what I'm talking about outside of this particular mill at this particular time for that grind setting. But it's in what is going to be cross-transferable is micron counts, right? And
okay.
And that's where we can get some kind of understanding of where we stand. So it's not just this is why I get so really interested in. I love this intuitive process in tea. I love this intuitive understanding of tea. But I also really enjoy empirical tools. I think they're such an interesting. I believe that science is a form of art, and I think that there's an opportunity there to explore art and to explore the perspective that science brings by allowing us to do like a study and be able to prove to ourselves using tools that we're achieving similar results to the time we had before. Sometimes there's just too many data points, too much variability, and it's exhausting to try and record it. And I get that, but it's interesting though when we can, and I guess it's learning when that opportunity arises and when it's kind of a waste of time to even try, but I don't think we need to give up before we try. You know what I mean?
But it's also developing parameters. It's not necessarily hard and fast rules. Like
Exactly.
1 degree here, 1 degree there is not going to be necessary. But like you're not going to make your matcha at 100 degrees or 200 degrees, right?
Yeah, it's developing kind of a margin of error, 100%. And I always find it interesting for people that like say a tea ceremony teacher who's been making matcha for decades. If you and I've actually have had this opportunity with some folks in the I almost said the tea ceremony industry, as if it's an industry. I've had some senseis, some teachers get back to me with weights that they use. They've been kind enough to me when I was an incorrigible early 20s person asking a 70-year-old tea ceremony teacher, how many grams of tea do you use? And she was like, I don't know. I'm like, can you weigh it? And she's like, sure. And she was very sweet, and she wrote this beautiful letter to my wife and I explaining the results of her work, and we were able to establish kind of a technique for cafe service that was inspired by this, which is 1 gram for every 60 mils. It seems to be pretty standard, or 1.25 grams for every 60 mils. And then we doubled that to 2 grams because we use 2 grams for our sort of lightweight koicha that we use for a latte shot. And anyway, what I want to do with you next, did you pick up a texture there? You drank it? Yeah. It's enjoyable though, right? Like it's sweet and bitter at the same time. Obviously there's bitters, there's sweets, there's acid, there's like a full flavor structure happening on the tongue.
Correct.
But what I want you to do is, because I think that, like, I went for a long time with that setting. I was more than happy. I said to myself, you know what, this is okay. But over time, especially when I compared it to stone milled stuff, I was like, you know what, it's just not. It's really easy to work with because, you know, the coarser the texture, less surface area means for the same kind of time of it, like interaction with liquid and agitation, I'm not going to bring out as much flavor development. It means I can actually have something that's a little bit less prone to get bitter.
Are we going to 5?
We're going to go to 5, and we're going to do 2 grams again. Okay. And we're going to do through the sieve. You know, in tea ceremony, you often see the tea sieved beforehand. So when you do pull from the natsume for during tea ceremony, you're having a sieved matcha. And this, by the way, Ryan, was milled this morning, so it's the freshest of the fresh, my friend.
Wow.
And
you
it's
spared no effort for this.
It's
tasting. That's beautiful.
Yeah, man. This is another thing that we're trying to bring to the table is this idea of transparency, right? Like freshness is all in the eye of the beholder. So I could have a tea that's fresh now but isn't fresh in 6 months, and that this tea will look and taste terrible in a year if you know it's just how it works when you mill something this fine. But can you even smell that difference in aromatic already? Like when you pour the water on top? Like, I mean,
you haven't gotten there yet, friend.
Okay. I find that just so interesting. Like you can almost smell that you've hit the right texture because of how the water hits and the aromatics that are released at that particular fineness. It's gonna give you this ideal aromatic when you've worked with that particular tea enough times, right? And it's just going to produce something pretty fantastic. And it also it's also going to whisk up a little bit finer. Like you can actually see like a different texture to it, even though we're using the same amount of water, the same amount of tea, and the same amount of agitation, etc. And a big thing I'd love you to focus on here is that it's going to be that finish. Like, I don't know if you kept any of the previous one, because I know you're using the same bowl for both. But I should have asked you to leave some aside, because it's really interesting to go back and forth between the two textures.
I tried to do the 2 savory gulps and ended up in 3s.
Yeah, no, it's actually 3 savory gulps. So you actually accidentally did it perfectly.
It's a tea festival miracle. I did it right.
It's magic. It's good. This goes with the theme. This is good. Okay.
The intuitive theme.
Yeah, right? Okay. I like it. So, gonna throw in 8.5 grams of what? Why am I doing that? I don't need to use 2 grams. Apparently I want to. Okay, so I'm gonna measure in the desired amount here.
Thanks, George. George has given us tea with George is saying that we deserve our matcha. Annika in Finland, she's been with us, I swear, I don't even know if she slept.
I know, hey, like I think I saw a good morning, but I don't think if that was a good morning that there was a lot of sleep in between when there was participation before that.
For the European version of the Tea Appreciation Society.
Your microphone, sir.
You mean the one that's up in my hair? I was saying that Annika's been holding it down, and we're going to have to somehow make sure that she's on for the European Tea Appreciation Society, because she's been doing this for as many hours as us, I swear.
I think that's kind of what it feels like, doesn't it? So big shout out to Annika Finn. That's great. Okay, so you're drinking this second one. It's the same matcha. It's a very, very almost imperceptible difference in the the texture difference. And you know, when I was getting my tea milled for me, and it was quite a stressful moment or a nerve-wracking moment for me when I brought this selection back to Mr. Fujioka in Wadzuka that we had milled at Jagasilk, and I said to him, "What do you think?" You know, and he drank. I whisked it up for him, and we compared it to stuff that he'd milled in house. He's got a great process. His mother, so Grandma Fujioka, hangs out with the mill and watches as it's milling and makes sure it doesn't, you know, mill dry when and 40 grams an hour. That's when you get a big enough order, you're kind of hanging out with it for a while, right? So he's 3 mills going in refrigeration. And I've nothing but respect for that man's processes. Like what an artist. But I'm so fascinated by this whole process, and so I really wanted to take on this experiment of what would it be like if I could mill it here? Because you know, if we're all about freshness, how can you do better than milling it yourself, right? And but we wanted to make sure that we were hitting these flavor points, right? That we weren't gonna just be like, oh, I want to be this like modern tea company that's just going to mill stuff without really exploring what that might mean in terms of the interruption of flavor perception. And so I went in, and he was really happy. He really liked this. He thought it was great. And I he's an honest guy. He's going to tell me if he's unhappy with what we produced. He didn't sell me tea for like 2 years, even though I was like, please, when I first met him. Okay, I'm going to put this through. And there we go. Okay, so that's the granular gauge now. It's kind of hard to see on there, but
there's good. Tilted back towards you is better.
You know, I kind of want to show you closer to the 0. I'll put the 0 close to you. There you go.
That's almost completely golden. Oh, that's beautiful.
Right. So I don't know if it's perceivable on camera there, but this is noticeably a little bit finer. This gets I'm sitting between, yeah, I'm just under 10 or right at 10. So instead of 12.5 to 15 microns, I'm at a little under 10 microns. So it's a provable difference in texture. It's not just something that, you know, obviously I know that it's finer because I tightened it, right? I tightened the mill a little bit finer. But it's interesting to see that reflected here and to know that my goal if I'm ever going to take this to a lab, is to hit this 10 micron threshold in Japan. So, and why is that important? You know, like it's there's a flavor difference. I don't know if you can taste there, Ryan.
I wouldn't even say flavor as much as the way it interacts with your tongue. Like it just starts to move outwards on the tongue. And I know there's the archaic views that there's like actual sections on the tongue that taste different, but
yeah,
it literally starts to wave outwards, and it lasts longer with its complexity because I think the neurological stimulation is trying to make sense of it because it's so complex.
That fineness, right? Like that sinks into the tongue, and you just get this greater sensation of flavor. And I thought that I was just trying to catch up to what's possible with a stone mill, but since doing this, I've learned just how hard it is to nail this texture with a stone mill as well. You know, like it's got to be, the teeth have to be sharp enough. You have to have put enough pressure on. You have to have adjusted things for the density of the leaf that you're milling. Like there's a lot involved in achieving a particular texture that goes beyond just the material or the grinder that you're using. You really need to be able to adjust your milling parameters to fit the needs of the tencha that you're milling. And that's been a really interesting exploration, because we do get different results on this micron meter depending on the text, like the density of the leaf that we're working with at the same mill setting, right?
Wow.
So that's and if it's a denser leaf, it's also going to produce more friction. So you're going to taste. There's going to be a perceptible increase in kind of a roasty profile. It's not like a hojicha roasty. I'm talking about like different, almost imperceptible levels of change with the Maillard reaction and the development of sugars on the tongue and what you perceive. But like I just find that so fascinating. We have a question from Annika Finn, mentioned already, but can you basically mill any gyokuro and always have fresh matcha? No, you cannot mill gyokuro to make matcha. It's a common misunderstanding. Gyokuro is a shade-grown leaf, right? And it's like this like really amazing loose tea, and you're gonna like a lot that you plan to make into gyokuro would be a similar quality of investment and time investment as you would for tencha, but they're going to go to completely different factories and they're going to be shade grown at different moments. You actually apply the shade growing apparatus to tencha a little bit later in the game than gyokuro, and you keep it on a little bit longer because you want to do something called futoraseru. So it's like a fattening of the leaf. It's actually the unraveling of the bud, because you don't want to have any bud content in your tencha because you're going to devein and destem the leaf. And you're also, when you harvest it, you're going to bring it to a completely different factory. It's not going to, there's a gyokuro kind of / sencha factory for your loose teas. When you're going to be making a tencha, you want to bring it to a tencha factory. And they're going to devein, destem. It's also going to be dried flat. It's not going to be rolled into needles. And so when you devein and destem and you're working with the pure part of the leaf, that's what becomes ara tencha. And then you're going to put it through a system of separation like we talked about with George at the Obubu farm. But this is, he was talking about aracha to sencha or shiagecha. We have ara tencha or rough tencha that gets processed to a point where it can get milled a little bit easier. And then you're going to have... you're going to have a matcha at the end of the day. But really good tea companies in Japan will say that their matcha is good for about 3 months from the mill date. And we used to put that on our products, 3 months from the mill date. But I was in a supermarket customer of ours, and I saw a customer looking at our product and a kind of a bigger company's product and saying that they would go for the bigger company's product because the expiry date said 2 years, and they thought that meant that it was a superior product. But it's really in the eye of the beholder. So now Ryan, I just put production dates. Because
just let folks know when it was done. And
sometimes that's confusing though. They see like a stamp with the production date and they assume that's the expiry date and they think it's already expired. So I put it in big red letters, milled in Victoria on, like really carefully. But it's not always gonna make itself known. But we're 15 years focused on matcha now, and we're starting, I think, to see the results of this effort. And it's not just us. There's a lot of people out there that are putting some significant energy into education when it comes to tea. But yeah, this is where we're at with matcha right now. We're really focused on this micron measurement, this adjustment of the mill to produce and draw out different flavor dynamics in our tencha. It's been really, really fun.
I think that's the most important part, is that it's fun, because like as much as you get into it, you're never frustrated. You're I think, like you say, you're starting to learn more from the measurement upwards about the leaf and thinking about, oh yeah, that's a thicker leaf. It's giving you a tool to view the leaf, and that comes back to that living organism.
Totally. I feel like this is why, like, as much as I respect and understand this perspective that tea is intuitive and it needs to be that way for it to really resonate with us on a heart level, I believe that these tools are fascinating in and of themselves. It allows a deeper exploration on another level. That's it's not necessarily a higher or a lower level of exploration. It's just a different way of interacting with them and learning another element of their personality, right? And knowing that, obviously we can make these logical conclusions that finer and coarser grind settings for different leaves are going to produce different results, and maybe this leaf requires this and this leaf requires that. But it's really interesting when we can use a granular gauge to empirically measure that texture and then draw those conclusions. And so we've been doing a lot of bookkeeping with this too. Every day, every kilogram that we mill, we have a sheet going, and we've been doing it since 2018, a digital sheet we have online where we measure, we can track where our grind settings have been for the last 2 years. And it's so interesting.
That's super cool.
Yeah, just to look back on that data and learn from it for certain.
All right, Jared. Well, it's coming up to about 22. We're just almost quarter to, and you know what that means. So, you're wearing your hat. You're loving it. You're one half of a fantastic partnership. What do you want to leave us with the Jagasilk hat? What kind of parting words can you give us?
I think that I mean, there's a number of things. I mean, matcha, even if it's good stuff, don't put it on a pedestal. I tell people, like good tea, you should treat it like good wine. You wouldn't open up all the bottles of wine in your wine cupboard just so you could taste them all. Like really, you open it up, go through it as fast as you can, keep drinking that tea, and wait. Be patient until you've gone through it, and then open up your next batch. You could have some genres going, like have your favorite oolong going, your favorite green going, your favorite matcha going. But especially if you crack open a matcha, you got 3 weeks, really, max, before you start to really taste some flavor degradation through oxidation. So, be aware of that when you're tasting your teas. Stay aware of harvest dates, and if you don't know them, then ask the purveyor that you're purchasing from for that information. And many of them can provide it. You just need to speak up and ask, and it's going to really educate you on what your next steps should be in terms of storage and taking the necessary precautions to keep your tea tasting really yummy. So yeah, I'd leave with that. And then texture plays a more important role than we realize. For the foreign market, a lot of matcha is milled coarser because it's faster to produce. It's not nearly as complex. Milling to the domestic standard of 10 microns or less is a lovely preferable way, in my opinion, to enjoying it. Like, indiscernible to the naked eye, the difference between the 3 and the 5 there, but I think you really pick it up in the finish. Like, you just get a much more complex finish out of the finer texture. And it gets even coarser than that, Ryan. The opposite can be said too. It gets finer, and then it's just actually can be unpleasantly gummy. It's like a chocolate that's been conched for too long. So yeah, it's an interesting exploration for sure.
Beautiful, Jared. Well, I think I'll say thank you right there. You're gonna have to plug in your hat and come back to being the co-director of the Tea Appreciation Society.
Awesome.
I guess as I'm right on camera and holding this over, we got Jared Varani joining us next. He's probably one of my favorite chemists because he brews up kombucha, and he'll be taking us through a tasting with that and talking to us about fermentation. There is no end to his knowledge and curiosity when it comes to fermentation. So if you stick with us, in exactly 15 minutes, we'll be back, and hopefully you'll be tuned in then. Maybe you're just waking up, and you can always catch the rest of the stuff on YouTube and stay with us for the next, I can't do the math right now, 8 hours. See you then. Thank you.
Bye.